Some people think the highway is empty at night, but they don't realize what watches us from the dark corners where headlights never reach. Tonight, we dive into the darkness of 7 most disturbing true trucker horror stories. These accounts come from real truckers, men and women who survived things most people can't even imagine. Names and locations have been changed for privacy, but the events remain terrifyingly real. Before we begin, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? And if you love real horror, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new nightmare. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and get ready, because this first story comes from a trucker who thought he knew every mile of the road, until one night proved him terribly, unforgivably wrong. I've been hauling freight for almost 19 years, and I learned one thing early. The road feels different after 2 a.m. Not quieter, heavier, like the dark settles deeper into the pavement. That night, I was hauling a refrigerated trailer from Ohio to Nebraska. Tight schedule, no room for delays. My dispatcher, Ray, had already warned me. Stay on Route 36. Construction crews closed most rural exits. Don't wander off. Fine by me. The route was straight, familiar. But around 2:47 a.m., the weather shifted. A thin, wet mist rolled across the asphalt, swirling like someone exhaled it from the tree line. My headlights carved tunnels in it, revealing nothing but more emptiness. But something felt wrong. My CB radio crackled, soft, static-filled, like someone trying to talk but afraid to speak. I leaned closer. "Breaker?" I said. Nothing. Just static, like whispering buried under static. I shook it off. Long nights play tricks. Still, the unease wouldn't let go. My chest felt tight, like I was being watched from somewhere outside the cab. Every shadow in the side mirror stretched too long. Every reflective road sign glinted like an eye. And then I saw it, a lone figure standing at mile marker 217, facing the road, motionless, like he'd been waiting specifically for me. I slowed my truck slightly, my instincts screaming at me to keep moving. But something in the way he stood froze me. Not waving, not signaling, just staring. I could barely make out his features through the mist, but the feeling of human calculation radiated from him. I reached for my CB, fingers trembling, and called Ray. "Hey, there's someone on the road at mile marker 217, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Static, no reply. I considered going around him, but the narrow, foggy shoulder left little room to swerve. My mind raced. This wasn't a prank. Someone this far out didn't just stand in the middle of nowhere for fun. As I passed, he lifted a hand slowly. Not a wave, more like a command. I froze for half a second, long enough to see a glint of metal in his coat pocket. That split second changed everything. My pulse hit my throat. Something about him wasn't just dangerous. It was personal, like he had chosen me. I floored the accelerator, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened, the hum of the engine drowning out my racing thoughts. Behind me, I could have sworn the fog shifted, as if he was following. I told myself I was imagining it. But every mile marker after that felt like he was still watching. I kept my eyes glued to the road, scanning every turn, every darkened shoulder. The fog clung to the tree line like smoke, muffling sound and light. I thought I was safe, until the next exit appeared. Or rather, didn't. I had planned to stop at the Green Hollow Rest Area, a tiny 24-hour truck stop I knew well. But as I approached, the sign had vanished. No lights, no building, nothing but empty asphalt stretching into black. My stomach dropped. I double-checked my GPS. The device blinked, frozen at a spot between two towns that shouldn't exist. Then the CB crackled again, soft, almost hesitant. "Stop! Turn! Now!" I slammed the volume knob down, thinking it was someone messing with me. But that voice, human, deliberate, felt wrong. I couldn't explain why it sent chills straight down my spine. Ahead, I saw headlights flicker in my rearview mirror. Another truck? Or him? My hands gripped the wheel tighter as every instinct screamed to run. But where could I run on this lonely stretch of road with no exit? The fog thickened, and my headlights barely reached 20 feet. And then, I caught a movement in the tree line. A figure stepping onto the asphalt, disappearing almost instantly, but leaving a shadow that stretched across the lane like it had weight. I realized the night wasn't just long. It was alive with intent. By the time I reached the next marker, my nerves were shredded. I spotted a dim light in the distance, finally, a rest area. Relief flooded me. I slowed, signaling my trailer lights. But as I pulled in, something felt off. The lot was too quiet. No trucks, no lights flickering from vending machines, nothing but a single, flickering street lamp. My gut screamed danger. I parked near the lamp, doors locked, engine running. A sound made me freeze, a low, scraping noise from behind the trailers. Slowly, I peeked through the side mirror. A figure was moving between trucks, silent, deliberate. His coat flapped in the cold wind, and in his hand, I glimpsed a crowbar. Panic hit me. I reached for the CB again. Ray wouldn't answer. My phone had no signal. Every instinct told me to drive off. But in this foggy, isolated lot, any sudden movement could draw him in. I inched forward toward the exit, heart pounding. The man stepped into the light. Tall, face shadowed, eyes locked on mine. He didn't move faster, just watched, waiting. The realization hit me. He knew exactly where I would stop. This wasn't random. He'd been tracking me for miles, studying my patterns. And tonight, he planned to finish whatever game he'd started. I swallowed hard. There was no calling for help. There was only me, the truck, and him. I decided I couldn't wait. I had to move. Slowly, I eased the truck into gear, every eye on the figure. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there letting me inch past like a predator testing its prey. The moment I cleared the street lamp, I floored it. Tires screeched slightly on wet asphalt, engine growling like a beast. My hands shook uncontrollably, my pulse hammering in my ears. Through the rearview mirror, I could see him step aside, but not out of fear, like he had been expecting this move all along. Every mile marker I passed after that felt like a countdown. My mind raced with questions. Who was he? Why me? Was this random violence? Or had he chosen his victims with careful precision? Then I noticed the exit signs blinking irregularly, sometimes too early, sometimes too late. Each one made me swerve, afraid I'd hit him if he suddenly appeared. The fog had thickened again, almost touchable, pressing in through the windows. For hours I drove like this. Every shadow, every reflective sign, every curve of the road screamed danger. And the feeling that he was still somewhere behind me, waiting for the perfect moment. It didn't leave. I needed to find other people, anyone. After nearly 3 hours of tense driving, I spotted a lone diner glowing in the fog. Neon letters flickered. Harper's Truck Stop. Relief mixed with exhaustion, but something about the parking lot felt wrong. A single semi-truck sat by the pumps, engine idling. A man in a worn hat leaned against the cab, smoking, eyes tracking me as I pulled in. His gaze was unsettling, not friendly. He waved slowly, too slowly, deliberately. I rolled down my window cautiously. "Long night?" he asked, voice calm, neutral. I nodded, trying to sound casual, but every hair on my neck stood on end. "You shouldn't be out there," he said. His eyes flicked to the road behind me. "Not tonight." My stomach sank. How did he know? Before I could respond, his tone shifted just slightly, a hint of warning and menace. "Some people on the road, they don't want you to reach your stop. Keep moving, or it could be the last run you make." I wanted to dismiss him, but the memory of the man at mile marker 217 clawed back. Every instinct screamed to run, yet I was trapped in this tiny truck stop with no idea which direction to go. He tipped his hat, got back in his truck, and drove off. And in that moment, I realized he was real, and he had just confirmed my worst fears. I left Harper's truck stop with my nerves raw, but I had no choice. Stopping again would be asking for trouble. The fog on the highway had grown thicker, swirling unnaturally around the trees and road signs. Every mile marker felt like a heartbeat, ticking away in the silence. About 20 miles down, I saw headlights flash in my rearview mirror. Another truck, or him? I couldn't tell. The lights kept pace with me, sometimes disappearing behind curves, only to reappear moments later. Then, without warning, the figure appeared on the road itself, illuminated by my own headlights. My stomach sank. He wasn't waving this time. He was blocking the lane, standing perfectly still, as if he'd planned my exact speed and position. I slammed on the brakes, jackknifing slightly, heart pounding. The semi behind me honked once, then vanished. But the figure on the road didn't move. Every instinct screamed, "Don't get out, don't stop, drive through." I swerved slightly, my trailer tires just missing him. He staggered back, almost like he had expected my maneuver, and then melted into the fog. I knew he wasn't done. Somewhere out there he was watching, tracking, waiting for the next mistake, and for the first time that night, I understood. This wasn't random. He wanted to see how far he could push me. I kept driving, adrenaline surging, eyes scanning every curve, shoulder, and tree line. I knew I couldn't keep going forever. Finally, I spotted a small motel, neon flickering weakly. Ridgeview Inn. A lone room would have to do. Pulling into the empty lot, I felt a flicker of relief. But the air was thick, too thick. I noticed a figure in the shadows near the exit, leaning against a telephone pole. His posture, deliberate, watching. I parked, checked all locks, and stepped out to stretch my legs. Something about the place screamed wrong, but exhaustion outweighed fear. Inside, the office clerk barely looked up. I paid cash, took my room key, and made my way up the creaky staircase. As I unpacked a few essentials, I heard footsteps outside the door. Heavy, slow, controlled, not casual. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a faint tap, tap, tap against the window. I bolted to the other side of the room, peeking out the blinds. The fog had thickened, the parking lot empty. No figure, no sign of him. But on the cracked asphalt below, I noticed the tire marks, a fresh set, perfectly matching my own. He had followed me here. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind through broken siding made me jump. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. The unmistakable scraping of metal on asphalt, growing louder outside. I grabbed my flashlight and peered through the blinds. His truck was there, parked diagonally across the lot. And then I saw him, standing just beyond the fog, staring straight at my window. I felt the full weight of his gaze, a cold, deliberate calculation. I knew this was it. If he wanted me, I had to outsmart him. I grabbed my keys, quietly exited the room through the fire escape, keeping low, hugging the shadows. As I reached my truck, I noticed a crowbar leaning against the hood, too perfectly placed. A message, a warning. I jumped in, started the engine, and floored it. He moved like a shadow, suddenly appearing in front of the truck, too fast. My tires skidded, the engine roared. But I narrowly swerved around him. In the rearview mirror, he stood in the fog, silent, watching, almost smiling. The sense of personal menace was overwhelming. I realized then, he didn't need to catch me tonight. He wanted me terrified. And judging by his precision, he'd been planning this for months. I drove for hours, not daring to stop, not daring to look back. Every curve in the road, every empty exit, felt like a potential trap. The fog finally lifted near sunrise, revealing the mundane highway I should have recognized. But my relief was muted. This night had changed me. When I finally reached a busy truck stop, I called my dispatcher. Ray listened, silent, then said, "Stay there. We'll get someone to escort you back to base." I watched the rearview mirror the entire time, half expecting him to appear again. He never did. But I know he's out there, somewhere, watching, tracking the same highways I drive every week. I later learned the police found another trucker in a neighboring state. His story eerily similar. Same fog, same figure, same crowbar left as a warning. That's when I realized this wasn't random. He's methodical, human, and still choosing his victims carefully. I call him the mile marker man. He doesn't strike with force. He terrorizes, stalks, and controls. And for the rest of my life, I drive with a constant, gnawing fear that the next mile marker I pass might reveal him again. Because on lonely highways, you are never truly alone. It was nearly midnight when I pulled off Route 84, hauling a load of industrial equipment from Pennsylvania to Michigan. The night was unusually quiet, the air sharp with frost that clung to the cab windows. My CB had been dead for hours. The usual chatter of truckers was gone, leaving me with nothing but the hum of the engine and the crunch of tires on the asphalt. I slowed at a rest stop to stretch my legs. That's when I saw it. An unmarked white semi parked awkwardly near the edge of the lot. No logos, no lights on the trailer, just the truck, silent and imposing. The driver was nowhere in sight. But something about the way it sat, too intentional, too placed, made my skin crawl. I leaned against my cab, pretending to check my paperwork. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every instinct screamed to leave. But something made me pause, study the rig. The side mirrors reflected nothing but fog and empty asphalt, except for a faint figure moving behind the cab, disappearing every time I blinked. A whisper of a thought crept in. This wasn't just a truck. This was a trap. I climbed back into the cab, trying to shake the unease that had settled like ice in my chest. The white truck remained in my mirrors as I started down the highway, but something about it made me grip the wheel tighter. I couldn't see headlights flashing. I couldn't see brake lights. Just a vague white silhouette that moved with mine, matching every lane change. I tried the CB, hoping for another driver to be awake, to break the tension. Static, not even the usual muffled chatter. I called my dispatcher. Silence. No signal. I was cut off, alone, and aware that whatever this was, it knew I was alone. I sped up slightly, rationalizing it. Maybe it was just a tired driver, someone careless. But then the truck flashed in my rearview mirror in a way that made my blood run cold. Its headlights didn't flicker, but the cab seemed to lean, like it was adjusting its focus. And then, from the foggy distance, I saw movement near the roadside. Another figure, crouched, barely visible, blending into the shadows. I panicked. I swerved slightly, narrowly missing a marker post. The cab shuddered. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about being followed. It was about control. Every mile, every curve, every decision I made, it was being studied. Like I was a rat in a maze, and the white truck was the predator, and tonight, the trap was closing. The fog thickened as I approached the next exit, a small, nearly forgotten rest stop. It looked abandoned, save for one flickering streetlight and the shadow of a gas pump. I slowed, hoping to find some semblance of safety in numbers. Another trucker, a clerk, anyone. But the lot was empty, eerily quiet. As I parked, the white semi appeared behind me in the lot, like it had followed me through the fog, silently, without lights. I froze in the cab, hands gripping the steering wheel, listening. A faint scuffing noise echoed across the asphalt, too deliberate to be the wind. I stepped out cautiously. The air smelled of diesel and frost. My eyes scanned the lot. Nothing moved. Then I saw him, a man in dark clothing, standing near the back of the white truck. No face visible, just a silhouette. He held something in his hands. Metal, maybe a crowbar, maybe a wrench. My gut told me he was waiting, watching, studying my reaction. I backed toward the edge of the lot, my mind racing. My phone had no signal, no CB, no one to call. Every instinct screamed to leave. But my truck, my only protection, was parked too close to him. One wrong move, one hesitation, and this man could make the night end for me. I climbed back into the cab, slamming the doors. My pulse was deafening. I started the engine slowly, trying to keep my hands steady. The man didn't move. He didn't flinch, just watched. I floored it, tires screeching slightly on the wet asphalt, and as I drove away, I realized he had chosen this game carefully, and I was already inside it. After the rest stop, I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe it had all been coincidences. But the moment I hit the open highway again, the white truck reappeared in my mirrors. Always behind, always keeping pace, never turning off, never blinking. I tried to shake it. Every lane change, every acceleration, every curve in the road was mirrored. And then came the subtle signs. Markers I passed too slowly, reflective posts that seemed to line up with my truck, almost as if the highway itself had become a trap. I called Ray again. Nothing. Static. My hands shook, and I realized the cab was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a cage. Every mile felt like being in a predator's jaws, my headlights revealing only the fog in front, while the shadows behind whispered threats I couldn't see. Then, at mile marker 142, I saw movement outside my side mirror. A man crouched briefly behind the guardrail, then vanished. I slammed the brakes, skidding slightly on the icy asphalt. Had he just tried to flag me down? Or was it a warning? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't random. He had been following me for miles, studying patterns, my speed, my stops, my hesitations. Every instinct told me to keep moving, but where could I go? The highway was empty. Isolation had become a weapon, and I was already in the middle of the trap. The next town offered only a flicker of hope. A gas station open 24/7, neon buzzing in the foggy distance. I slowed, parked near the pumps, and tried to calm my racing heart. But the white truck wasn't behind me this time. It was already there. I froze as I noticed the figure on the driver's side, placing a crowbar neatly on the pavement, angled as if it had been positioned specifically for me to see. My hands shook violently. Every instinct screamed to leave immediately, but fear had my feet glued to the asphalt. I got back into my truck, engine running, windows up. The crowbar remained, glinting under the flickering neon, a silent reminder that he could appear anywhere, anytime. I tried to tell myself it was a prank, a sick game by another trucker. But this wasn't random. It was calculated, precise, human. Someone who had been watching my route, tracking my schedule, understanding exactly where I'd be and when. When I left the gas station, I took a different route, weaving through side roads, hoping to lose him. But no matter the detour, every time I looked in my mirror, I saw the white truck, unmarked, silent, waiting. He didn't rush. He just taunted. By midnight, exhaustion and terror were clawing at my mind. I realized I wasn't just being followed. I was hunted, and the highway had become his territory. Hours later, I took a longer route, hoping the isolation would work in my favor. But the fog returned, denser than ever. The white truck appeared without warning at a curve in the highway. Headlights off. No sound, no signal, just presence. I floored the accelerator, heart hammering. But he matched me mile for mile, silently asserting control. I could feel the psychological weight pressing down. Every mile, every movement was being judged. Then I noticed something terrifying. He wasn't just following me. He was mirroring my exact route, anticipating lane changes, gas stops, and even traffic adjustments. I realized with dread that this had been planned, maybe for weeks, months, and I was the next target. As I rounded a bridge, a figure appeared on the roadside, standing, holding a crowbar. My truck swerved slightly, tires gripping the slick asphalt. The figure didn't flinch. He just watched. A predator testing prey. I muttered under my breath. This isn't luck. This isn't coincidence. This is human intent. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles whitened. My cab had become both shield and cage. The night had turned into a trap, and I had no idea how far it would go before it ended. Exhaustion forced me to stop at a lonely roadside motel. Neon flickered weakly. Creekside Inn. I parked, heart still racing, and tried to convince myself that maybe, just maybe, I was safe. I noticed immediately, though, that the white truck was already there, parked at the far end, engine off, shadowed figure leaning against the cab. My pulse spiked. He had anticipated my stop. I paid cash, took the key, and rushed to my room, locking the door. Silence. For a moment, I thought maybe I was safe. Then a faint tapping at the window, tap, 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 made me jump. Peeking through the blinds, I saw nothing. But the fog hid much. I stepped back and realized the parking lot reflected a truth I hadn't accepted yet. He could appear anywhere, anytime. I spent hours watching, listening. Every truck that left the lot made me flinch. Every shadow stretching across the asphalt made my skin crawl. And I knew one thing with terrifying clarity. The man hunting me didn't need to strike tonight. He wanted me terrified. He had won the first round. The highway was no longer just a road. It was his domain. I left the motel before dawn, unable to stay another minute. My truck rumbled onto the highway, fog hugging the ground like a living thing. For the first time, I noticed another vehicle shadowing me. A smaller black sedan. The white semi was still behind me, silently asserting dominance. The black sedan weaved in and out. A human predator making its presence known. My stomach churned. There were multiple people involved, and I was trapped between them. I tried taking alternate routes, but every road seemed compromised. Every gas station, every rest stop felt like a potential ambush. My instincts screamed to run, but the road itself had become a cage, the night a meticulously planned labyrinth. At mile marker 188, I saw movement. A man crouched by the guardrail, swinging a crowbar in the moonlight, observing, waiting for a mistake. My tires slipped slightly on the frosty asphalt. I pressed the accelerator harder, knowing that hesitation meant death. And yet, even as I raced, a horrifying thought crept in. He wasn't chasing me just to harm me physically. He wanted to terrorize, break me, and assert control over my every movement. The human element, the calculation, the patience, the premeditation, was more frightening than anything supernatural. Hours later, I reached a small town with a well-lit 24-hour truck stop. Relief. Fleeting. The white semi waited at the far edge. The black sedan parked next to it. And then I saw him. The figure from mile marker 142, stepping slowly toward the lot, crowbar in hand. I floored my truck, tires squealing, narrowly avoiding the edge of the lot. But the layout of the exit traps was precise. Every turn I made, the white semi and black sedan moved in tandem, cutting off escape routes. Panic clawed at me. My cab felt like a coffin on wheels. Every reflex screamed to dodge, swerve, run. But the predators anticipated it. I hit the main road, taking the first highway exit I could. My pulse roared in my ears. In my mirrors, the black sedan followed at a distance. The white semi loomed like a shadow. Silent, patient, calculating every move I made. I realized this. They weren't going to let me go easily. This wasn't about robbery. This wasn't about random violence. This was a hunt. A meticulously orchestrated human hunt across highways and small towns. And I had become the prey. I drove through the night, praying for daylight, praying for open roads, praying for someone, anyone, to notice my truck and intervene. Eventually, the horizon began to lighten. Sunrise didn't bring comfort, it brought clarity. Somehow, I had lost the white semi and black sedan. I reached a busy interstate junction with multiple trucks, cars, and surveillance cameras. I stopped at the first state police station I saw and reported everything. Names, times, mile markers, everything. They took notes but warned me. Cases like this rarely have concrete evidence. The psychological toll was immediate. I couldn't stop seeing them, their shadows, their crowbars, their patience. Every long stretch of highway still made my pulse spike. Every reflective sign or foggy curve reminded me. They were still out there, watching, waiting. I later learned other truckers had similar experiences. White, unmarked semis, shadowed human figures, crowbars left as warnings. They were coordinated, precise, deliberate. These weren't random criminals. They were hunters studying highways like maps, planning carefully, terrorizing, and only occasionally striking. I call them the highway hunters. They don't just target vehicles. They target your fear, your control, your mind. Even now, years later, I never drive late-night routes alone. I never take unknown exits. I never trust empty rest stops. And I always check my mirrors twice, 3 times, hoping, praying, that the fog doesn't reveal them lurking once more. Because on America's highways, you are never really alone. It was past midnight, and I was driving alone on Route 66, hauling a refrigerated load of produce from Chicago to St. Louis. The highway was empty, the cold night air pressing against the cab windows like a living thing. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other tapping the dashboard, trying to stay awake. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw headlights. Fast, erratic, coming from behind a curve. A car had lost control and skidded across the median, hitting the guardrail and then vanishing into the fog. I slammed on the brakes, my truck jackknifing slightly, tires squealing. The scene was chaotic, twisted metal, shattered glass. But there was no driver in sight. Only the faint impression of a figure, moving strangely, almost floating. I got out to check, heart pounding, but the car was empty. No one had survived, or maybe they had vanished. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Something wasn't right. My instincts screamed to leave, but I couldn't just abandon the wreck. I radioed the dispatcher, but the static was deafening. No response. As I climbed back into the cab, I noticed it. A faint shadow in the passenger seat. No one had entered the truck, yet there it was. A hazy silhouette, seated, almost transparent, staring straight ahead. My mind raced. Am I hallucinating? Fatigue? Fog? But the feeling of eyes on me was real, oppressive, suffocating. I hit the accelerator, hoping to shake it off. But every curve, every mile, the shadow remained, growing clearer, more tangible. And a thought gnawed at me. This passenger wasn't human, yet it was following me, riding along on purpose. The shadow stayed in the passenger seat as I drove, silent and still, yet impossible to ignore. Every glance toward the seat made my stomach knot. I could feel it watching me, not in a playful way, but with a purposeful, cold intensity. The highway twisted ahead, and the fog thickened. My headlights cut through it only a few feet at a time, illuminating the guardrails and reflective markers like eerie sentinels. The figure shifted ever so slightly when I swerved around a sharp bend. My pulse accelerated. Was it mimicking me, or anticipating my moves? I reached for my CB again. Anyone out there? My voice cracked, lost in static. No response. Then, the subtle creak of the passenger seat. I froze. My breath hitched. The figure's head turned slowly, a featureless face emerging from the misty silhouette, just for a moment, and then gone. I tried rationalizing it. Lack of sleep, stress, highway monotony. But instinct refused to let me. Something unnatural had joined my run, and it wasn't just riding along. It was testing me, studying me. By the time I reached a small rest stop, I could no longer ignore the feeling that the shadow was controlling the space around me. Every light seemed dimmer. Every distant car sound seemed amplified. And when I looked again at the passenger seat, it wasn't seated normally. It had moved closer, looming as if it wanted me to notice. I realized, with dread, this wasn't a ghost passively hitching a ride. It was an entity that had chosen me, and it had a reason I was not yet aware of. By 2 a.m., fatigue was grinding me down. I could barely keep my eyes open, but the ghostly presence refused to let me rest. Then I heard it, the faintest whisper, barely audible over the rumble of tires. You shouldn't be here. I snapped my head toward the passenger seat. The shadow hadn't moved its mouth, yet the voice was there. Chilling, immediate, personal. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. I tried to drive faster, hoping motion could break the hold it had on me. But the whispers continued, growing louder, overlapping, almost mocking my attempts to escape. Every mile marker, every reflective post, seemed to pulse with intent, synchronized with the entity's whispers. I caught glimpses of movement outside. Fog rolling unnaturally along the asphalt, shadows flicking between the trees, almost like it was manifesting in the world around me, not just inside the truck. My mind screamed that I was losing control, that the road itself was no longer mine. I called my dispatcher, shaking. Something's in my truck. I don't know what it is. Static, no response. Panic surged. I tried to rationalize. Fatigue, hallucination, stress. But the presence was tangible, pressing at my senses, bending reality just slightly. And every instinct screamed. The ghost wasn't riding with me for company. It was testing me. And for now, it was winning. I reached the next rest stop, hoping to shake it off. But the shadow followed. I parked and sat in the cab, trying to breathe, trying to convince myself it was fatigue. Then I noticed something chilling. The dashboard lights dimmed when it leaned closer. The AC seemed to pulse coldly, like the temperature itself was being manipulated. I tried to speak to it. Who? What are you? The whisper returned, even closer, even clearer. I've been waiting for you. I staggered back in my seat, terrified. The entity wasn't invisible. It was semi-solid, ghostly, but tangible, shaping the cab, leaning over, bending the space around me. The feeling of eyes, millions of them, countless judgments, pressed into my mind. I left the rest stop immediately, tires screeching on wet asphalt. The road ahead twisted unnaturally, as if the highway itself had changed to accommodate the ghost, forcing me to stay inside its domain. Every mile marker was now a warning, every reflective sign a signal that I was being watched. It wasn't just a passenger, it was a haunter, a predator, a manipulator. My heartbeat became a metronome of terror. I realized the terrifying truth. It didn't need to harm me physically. Its power was psychological, emotional, complete. And for some reason, I had been selected. I drove through the night, gripping the wheel so tight I thought my fingers might break. The shadow didn't move much, but its presence pressed into my mind, a constant weight. Then I heard it again, this time unmistakable. You can't escape me. The words weren't spoken aloud. They resonated inside my skull, echoing over every turn of the tires, every mile marker. My heart pounded in response. I dared a glance at the seat. The figure's head tilted, almost inquisitive, as if enjoying my terror. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, pull over, call someone, do anything. But the moment I slowed, the highway seemed to tighten around me. Fog thickened unnaturally, reflective signs warped, the shadows between the trees deepened. I realized the passenger wasn't just riding with me. It controlled the environment, bending reality slightly to ensure I remained inside its grip. I tried reasoning. Maybe it was a hallucination, maybe fatigue, maybe a cruel trick of light and fog. But the sensation of eyes on me, of breath not my own in the cab, was undeniable. I could feel its anticipation, like a predator savoring the final moments before the kill. And then it leaned closer. I swear I felt its cold fingers brush the back of my neck, though nothing touched me. My mind screamed. My chest burned with panic. The realization hit me like a punch. This entity had chosen me, studied me, and I was trapped inside a nightmare from which there was no natural escape. Hours passed, the night stretching endlessly. The highway curved over an old steel bridge, fog swirling around the girders. As I drove onto it, I felt the cab grow colder, the air thick and heavy. The ghostly passenger seemed to loom larger, more defined, its silhouette bending toward me. Then I saw them. Shadows outside, reflected in the cab windows, mimicking my every movement. It wasn't just the ghost. The fog itself seemed alive, writhing with figures that were almost human, almost solid, yet impossibly unreal. I realized the bridge wasn't just a crossing, it was a stage, and I was the only player. I swerved instinctively, tires squealing, but the reflections stayed, locking onto my movements, tracking, testing. The whispers returned, louder, insistent. You belong here. You are mine. I fought to rationalize, to convince myself I was losing it. But my instinct screamed otherwise. Something was outside my cab, stalking me, shaping the fog, guiding the shadows. Every reflective post on the bridge glimmered like eyes, watching, waiting. I knew then that escape wasn't just physical, it was psychological. I had to survive the terror, retain control of my mind, or the highway itself would consume me. The cab felt impossibly small, the bridge impossibly long, and the entity's presence impossibly close. I gripped the wheel, white-knuckled, and whispered a desperate plea. Just let me reach dawn. By 4 a.m., desperation clawed at me. My phone finally flickered with a signal. Hands shaking, I called the dispatcher. I don't know what's happening, I stammered. Static, then a voice I knew. Where are you? Before I could answer, I felt a cold hand press against my shoulder, the ghost. I froze, the call still connected. The dispatcher's voice was muffled, distorted by static. Then, a whisper inside my mind. Simultaneously, my own thoughts, an alien. You called them. You sealed your fate. The cab felt impossibly tight, the steering wheel heavier than ever. Fog twisted outside, forming shapes. Faces, bodies, all fleeting, all impossible to describe. Every instinct told me to hang up, drive faster, ignore it. But even as I tried, I could feel its cold pressure, its intent, shaping my mind like clay. By the time the call ended, I realized the terrifying truth. It wasn't just following me. It was feeding on my fear, my panic, my every rational thought. Every mile I drove, the shadow grew more solid, more oppressive, more deliberate. I whispered aloud to myself, though I knew it heard every word. I have to survive. I have to reach sunrise. The sun was just starting to push against the horizon, pale and weak. I approached a desolate crossroads, the fog thinning slightly. I thought maybe daylight would weaken it. But the shadow didn't fade. It grew taller, more defined, almost solid, its presence bending light, distorting the world around me. I hesitated. The crossroads seemed endless, stretching impossibly far in all directions. Each route looked the same, each road a trap. The whispers returned, overlapping, louder, demanding my attention, controlling my thoughts. I gripped the wheel, trying to focus on reality. The fog moved unnaturally, curling into shapes, manifesting limbs, faces, impossible angles, mocking me. My pulse pounded, every nerve screaming. I realized then, the ghost didn't want me dead. It wanted me trapped, terrified, and aware. The world outside the cab didn't matter. All that mattered was the space inside, the cab, the road, my mind. I forced my eyes onto the rearview mirror. For the first time, it smiled, or something like it, a shape impossible to describe, human and not human at the same time, a predator acknowledging prey. I whispered a prayer, swallowed hard, and floored the accelerator. Daylight was my only chance. Sunlight crept through the mist as I approached the edge of the highway. I dared a glance at the passenger seat. The shadow was almost solid now. Humanoid, featureless, immense. I could feel its attention, its hunger for fear, its anticipation. I swerved slightly, trying to shake it. The cab shuddered unnaturally. I felt a cold press against my shoulder again, invisible but undeniable. The whispers returned, louder than ever. You cannot leave. I realized this was it. The climax of the hunt. The entity wanted me to face it, acknowledge it. Every twist of the highway, every mile marker, every reflection in the cab was designed to break my resolve. I forced myself to focus on the road, on the horizon, on survival. I floored the truck, tires skidding slightly on the damp asphalt. And a strange thing happened. The shadow flickered, almost like it resented the movement, resisting the dawn, clinging to darkness. I forced my eyes forward. I wouldn't acknowledge it anymore. I wouldn't respond. I wouldn't look. And slowly, agonizingly, as sunlight began to wash over the highway, I felt it retreat, dissolving into the fog, leaving only the empty seat behind. By full daylight, I reached a busy interstate junction. Other trucks, cars, and travelers gave me a fleeting sense of safety. I parked at a truck stop, hands trembling, heart racing. The seat beside me was empty, silent, normal. Yet the memory of the presence remained. I filed a report later, describing the incident to local authorities. No evidence, no traces. Only my story, dismissed as fatigue or hallucination. But I know the truth. That entity exists. I felt its intent, its patience, its need to terrify. And I know it waits, watching, ready to find the next lone driver on a dark highway. I call it the ghostly passenger. It isn't evil in a traditional sense. It doesn't strike. It observes, manipulates, controls, and leaves you with a horror of being hunted, knowing that the highway itself can harbor a consciousness that bends reality. Even now, years later, I avoid driving alone at night. I avoid foggy highways. Every reflective sign, every curve, every long stretch of asphalt triggers memories of watching eyes and whispers that will never leave me. And I know, somewhere, out there, it waits again. Because on the dark highways of America, you are never truly alone. It was a bitterly cold October night, and I was hauling a refrigerated load through rural Pennsylvania. The highway stretched ahead, empty and silent, except for the soft hum of my truck and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The fog rolled in patches, clinging to the road like a living thing. Hours into the drive, I noticed a rest stop glowing dimly in the distance. It looked abandoned, but the flickering lights promised warmth and a chance to stretch. I slowed, pulling into the lot. The air was thick with the smell of damp asphalt and decay. Even before parking, I felt it. A strange, oppressive weight in the air, like unseen eyes were watching. I stepped out, boots crunching on the gravel. The lot was empty except for one rusted pickup, parked haphazardly near the vending machines. No lights on, no engine running. I thought of calling it a night, but exhaustion pushed me toward the diner tucked in the corner of the lot. The diner's windows were streaked with grime, and inside, the booths sat empty, chairs tipped over, as if someone had fled in a hurry. A faint smell of burnt coffee lingered. I stepped inside cautiously. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud in the silence. Then I saw it. A shadow in the corner, a figure hunched over a table, rocking slightly. Not moving its head, not making a sound, just watching, waiting. My pulse spiked. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a drunk sleeping it off, maybe a prank. But the air grew colder, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of being observed. I turned toward the counter, searching for a worker. Nothing. No register, no cash, no sign of life. Only the shadow, silently rocking, its presence pressing into my chest like a physical weight. I cautiously walked toward the counter, my boots crunching on the worn tiles. The shadow didn't move, yet I could feel its gaze. Every instinct screamed to leave, but fatigue had me trapped. My eyes scanned the diner. Overturned chairs, cracked coffee mugs, and scribbled messages on the walls. messages that made no sense but whispered warnings in some strange rhythm. I approached one of the booths. The shadow hunched over, its outline flickering like a candle flame in a draft. Then I noticed something chilling. It wasn't a person at all. Its form was almost translucent, edges shimmering unnaturally. I stepped back, heart hammering. Outside, the fog thickened, curling around the lot like fingers reaching for me. I could hear faint whispers carried by the wind, almost in unison with the swaying of the shadow. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure seemed aware of my fear, amplifying it, bending the air in the diner to match the tension in my chest. The lights flickered again, plunging the space into brief darkness. When they returned, the shadow had shifted closer, its empty form leaning toward the aisle. A sudden chill crawled up my spine. I realized the entity didn't need to touch me to frighten me. It was feeding on my fear, shaping reality around my perception, warping the diner into its own stage of terror. I ran to the door, bolted into the lot, and jumped back into my truck. As I started the engine, I could see the shadow at the window, still rocking, still watching, refusing to let me leave its domain. Back on the highway, my hands shook on the wheel. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had hitched a ride, or at least followed me in spirit. The road stretched endlessly, fog drifting over the asphalt, headlights cutting through the gray like knives. Every mile marker seemed to watch me. Every shadow between trees hinted at movement. The memory of the rocking figure in the diner haunted me. I kept glancing toward the passenger seat. Empty, yet the hair on my neck stood straight. Then I heard it. A faint creak, a soft tapping from the cab behind me. I swiveled my head. Nothing. Just the hum of tires and wind. But the tapping returned, irregular, deliberate, like fingernails against metal. I tried to rationalize. Wind, fatigue, my imagination. But the moment I looked back at the road, a figure flickered in the rearview mirror, standing between the fog and my headlights. Tall, featureless, yet human enough to trigger panic. My pulse spiked. I pressed harder on the accelerator. The shadow followed. Every curve, every bend, every hill seemed orchestrated to keep me trapped in its gaze, to torment me with proximity I could not escape. It wasn't just the rest stop anymore. The entity had extended its reach into the highway, hunting, testing, and making sure I understood. Wherever I went, it could follow. The tapping continued, echoing through the cab. My mind screamed to ignore it, but instinct screamed louder. Then I noticed marks on the back window. Handprints, fading in the mist outside, too high for me to reach. Whispers filled my mind, soft at first, growing louder with each mile. They weren't words at first, just sounds, like a chorus of warnings warning me to turn back. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. Every reflective sign along the highway seemed to twist, shapes forming in the reflections, almost human, almost alive. My headlights caught them in fleeting glimpses. A face, a shadow, a figure bending toward me before vanishing. Then I noticed something impossible. The temperature in the cab dropped drastically. My breath became visible. The dashboard flickered with static, radio sputtering out distorted voices, not broadcasting from any station, yet clearly intelligible. "You cannot leave." I slammed the brakes, tires squealing on damp asphalt. The figure appeared in the passenger seat again, hunched, featureless, rocking slightly. No hands, no face, just presence. My mind screamed. The entity didn't need to harm me. It was manifesting terror, controlling perception, testing my resolve. I realized then that the haunted rest stop had been just the beginning. It followed, grew stronger, feeding on my fear, shaping the night itself into a trap. Hours passed. Fatigue, fear, and cold blurred reality. I stopped at another truck stop, hoping daylight would weaken the presence. The lot was empty, lights flickering like the diner. I stepped out. The air smelled of damp asphalt and something more rotten, lingering, and almost imperceptible decay. I glanced into the passenger side mirror. A shadow moved behind me, flickering as though caught between dimensions. Heart pounding, I turned, but the lot was empty. My reflection in the mirror seemed warped, eyes darker, tense, like the shadow had imprinted itself on my perception. I entered the gas station, desperate for warmth. The fluorescent lights buzzed, then dimmed. The floor tiles reflected something impossible. A figure crouched at the end of the aisle, rocking slightly, always in shadows. I ran back to the truck, feeling it follow me, not physically, but psychically, haunting every step. Once inside, I tried to ignore it, tried to drive, tried to escape. But the shadow manifested again, almost solid, leaning over the seat closer than before. Its presence pressed into my chest, my breath short, my pulse erratic. It wasn't just a ghost. It was alive in fear itself, a sentient force shaping reality to torment me. Every mile now, every highway, every foggy curve was a stage for its game. The fog thickened again as I merged back onto the highway. Every mile seemed longer than the last, the darkness stretching endlessly. The rocking figure from the rest stop haunted my peripheral vision, flickering in the shadows outside the cab. I tried talking to myself, reciting prayers, chanting my own thoughts to stay grounded. But every sound in the cab twisted unnaturally, echoing in ways that weren't real, resonating like whispers from unseen mouths. My own breathing sounded alien. Then I noticed it. Marks on the dashboard. Long, thin scratches forming words I couldn't read, etched into the metal while I hadn't touched it. Panic clawed at my chest. The shadow in the passenger seat seemed to lean closer, almost laughing silently, its presence saturating every inch of the cab. I considered pulling over, stopping completely, but instinct screamed, "Never stop, not here, not now." Every pause gave it power, every hesitation made it bolder. I gripped the wheel, forcing my mind on the road, on dawn, on survival. But the shadows outside twisted unnaturally, mirroring the rocking, hunched movements of the figure beside me. Every reflective surface, every puddle on the asphalt, revealed glimpses of the entity's face, featureless yet human enough to make me shiver. It dawned on me. The entity didn't just haunt locations. It followed people, extended its reach, amplified fear, and I was trapped inside its playground. Morning light was just beginning to pierce the fog, yet the highway remained oppressive. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The rocking figure appeared again, looming taller than before. My pulse spiked, fingers tightening on the wheel. Suddenly, my reflection in the mirror changed. My eyes were darker, hollow, echoing the shadow's presence. I recoiled, realizing the entity was infecting perception, bending reality to trap me in fear. I passed another rest stop, abandoned and silent. I considered stopping for gas, but instinct screamed against it. Something about the empty lot, the cracked signs, the flickering lights, reminded me of the haunted diner. Then I heard it whisper again in my mind. "You cannot leave until you see the truth." Every reflex screamed to ignore it. I pressed the accelerator, tires squealing slightly on the wet road. Fog swirled unnaturally around the cab, twisting into shapes of people, eyes, faces, watching, judging. The entity wasn't just present. It was alive in its intent. Every mile marker, every curve, every reflective sign was orchestrated to keep me on edge, aware and terrified. I realized this would not end until I reached daylight fully. Until then, the shadow would bend the road, manipulate perception, and force me to confront fear itself. By mid-morning, I was exhausted, every nerve raw. The fog began to lift slightly, yet the shadow remained, rocking, watching, its presence inescapable. My mind raced. Drive faster? Stop? I couldn't decide without panic overtaking me. Then my truck shuddered. Engine misfire. Lights flickered. Radio static hissed, but not randomly. The whispers were clearer, louder, forming words I understood. Turn back. You belong here. I slammed the wheel, heart racing. Every instinct screamed to flee. Every sense told me that this entity was more than a ghost. It was a predator of fear, shaping my reality, hunting me psychologically. Outside, the fog curled unnaturally, forming shapes of human figures that seemed to stretch, bend, and recoil as if alive. Every reflective surface, puddle, and mirror showed hints of the rocking entity, its presence growing more solid, more oppressive. I realized the final stretch of highway wasn't just asphalt and trees. It was the entity's domain, and I was trapped. I couldn't slow down. I couldn't stop. I had to survive until daylight. Finally, pale sunlight began to pierce the fog. I felt hope, tentative and fragile. The rocking shadow remained, but it flickered, retreating slightly from the light. Every mile felt like a test. The entity seemed to resist the daylight, its form warping, fading, losing the grip it had on the night. My pulse raced, hands white on the wheel. I whispered prayers, reciting every line I could remember. The fog thinned further. The highway straightened. The rocking figure's movement slowed, jerking unnaturally before vanishing completely. For the first time in hours, I dared to breathe freely. Daylight wasn't full safety, but it was a shield. The haunted rest stop, the rocking shadow, the whispers, they had lost their power. For now, I reached a busy highway junction. Cars, trucks, and travelers gave me fleeting comfort. I parked, shaking, staring at the passenger seat. Empty, silent, normal. Yet the memory of the rocking figure remained, etched into my mind like a scar. I filed a report later, but authorities found nothing. No evidence, no explanation. Only my story. Fatigue, hallucination, maybe. But I know what I saw, felt, and experienced. I call it the haunted rest stop. It isn't malicious in a conventional sense. It doesn't attack, kill, or steal. It exists to terrify, to trap, to feed on fear. And it will wait for the next lone driver who dares stop on a dark, foggy highway. Even now, years later, I avoid rest stops at night, foggy highways and abandoned diners. Every reflective window, every curve, every lonely mile brings back memories of rocking shadows, whispers in the mind, and the inescapable feeling of being hunted. The highway holds secrets, and some of them are very much alive. It was just past midnight, the kind of hour when the highway feels endless and the mind begins to wander into shadows. I was hauling a refrigerated load through rural Ohio, miles from any town or gas station. Fog clung low to the ground, weaving through the trees like ghostly fingers. My headlights cut through the haze, illuminating the empty road ahead. Everything was silent except for the hum of the tires and the soft drone of the engine. Hours of isolation had made me hypersensitive. The slightest sound, a rustling leaf, a creaking signpost, made my pulse spike. Then I noticed it, a shape standing at the edge of the road. A figure, tall and thin, motionless, just beyond the fog's reach. My mind tried to rationalize. pedestrian, hitchhiker. But the shape didn't move, didn't shift. It simply watched, waiting. I slowed the truck instinctively. The figure didn't step back. Its presence pressed into me, unnatural, impossible, like it didn't belong in the world I knew. My hands tightened on the wheel. The air inside the cab seemed heavier, colder. I considered turning around, but the road behind me was just as empty, just as fogged in shadows. My heart pounded. The figure flickered once, twice, as though it existed between reality and some other dimension, testing me, studying me. I whispered a prayer, a reflex I didn't even realize I still remembered. My headlights illuminated the figure again. This time, its form seemed distorted, taller, limbs bending in impossible ways. The highway felt alive with it, stretching and twisting under its gaze. I knew then, whatever this was, it wasn't human, and it wasn't going to let me drive away easily. I couldn't shake the figure from my mind as I drove on. Every curve of the highway seemed to stretch unnaturally, fog curling around the trees and road signs, almost like it was guiding me deeper into its domain. My pulse hammered in my chest with every mile. Then I saw it again. The shadow appeared at the roadside, closer this time, and moved in a way that no human could. Its limbs bent at odd angles, almost skeletal yet fluid. I slammed the brakes, my tires screeching on the damp asphalt. It didn't run or flee. It simply watched, tilting its head in curiosity. My cab felt like a prison. The air inside was thick, suffocating, and cold. I could sense it probing, testing my fear. Every instinct screamed to drive faster, but the fog and winding road made me feel trapped, like the highway itself had become a labyrinth controlled by this entity. Then the whispers began, soft, almost inaudible, but unmistakably words. You cannot leave. Not yet. I gripped the wheel tighter. My breath came in ragged gasps. Every reflective surface, the rearview mirror, the truck windows, showed glimpses of it. Sometimes it appeared as a tall humanoid. Sometimes the form stretched, warped, impossible to define. It wasn't just a shadow. It was something older, intelligent, patient, feeding on my fear with deliberate intent. I floored the accelerator, trying to put distance between us. Yet even in motion, I could feel its gaze burning through the fog, always tracking me, always waiting. Hours passed. Fatigue and fear clouded my mind, but I dared not close my eyes. The road stretched endlessly, lined with fog and twisted tree silhouettes. Then I caught it in the rearview mirror, a glimpse of the figure inside the cab. My hands flew to the mirror, heart pounding. The seat beside me appeared empty at first, yet the shadow flickered, manifesting intermittently, as if phasing in and out of reality. My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed that it wasn't human. I could feel it, probing my thoughts, warping perception, bending the world to its will. I tried to rationalize. Fatigue, hallucination, exhaustion. But the shadow didn't obey logic. Every reflective surface, window, side mirror, windshield, revealed hints of it. Limbs bending impossibly, silhouette stretching toward me, presence pressing like a physical weight. Then the whispers returned, louder this time, more insistent. The highway's mine. You cannot escape. The cab grew colder, breath visible in the air, even though the engine warmed it. I shivered uncontrollably, gripping the wheel as if my life depended on it, which, in that moment, it did. I floored the accelerator. The fog seemed to curl around the truck, following, pressing, warping the road. The entity wasn't just outside anymore. It had entered my world, invading every sense, every thought, every shadow. The fog thickened unnaturally. Mile markers blurred as if stretching ahead impossibly. The shadow moved fluidly along the roadside, never crossing the yellow line, yet always parallel, always in view. My mind screamed, but rational thought failed. I was trapped in a nightmare that obeyed rules unknown to the waking world. I tried to call dispatch, phone in hand, voice trembling. No signal, only static punctuated by a faint, distorted whisper. "You are mine now." The cab felt impossibly small, yet my fear made it feel enormous, like a cage. Every signpost, every curve, every tree reflected the shadow in impossible ways. Limbs bent, faces appeared, always watching. I realized the entity wasn't just a shadow. It controlled the road, shaped the fog, warped reality, ensuring I stayed in its domain, feeding on terror mile after mile. I gritted my teeth and pressed forward. There would be no escape through logic or reason. Only by surviving the night could I hope to see daylight. The whispers became unbearable. They echoed in my mind, overlapping, turning my thoughts into static. Every mile marker, every reflective puddle, every tree seemed alive, mimicking the shadow's movements. I tried to drive faster, but the road twisted unnaturally. Every turn brought the shadow closer, almost inside the cab now, rocking, stretching, testing my fear. The whispers became voices, taunting, commanding, promising that I would never leave the highway. I slammed my hands on the wheel. The cab shuddered. My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to escape, yet the entity manipulated the road, forcing me to stay in its nightmarish labyrinth. The fog had become almost solid, clinging to the highway like a living thing. Every mile I drove, I felt the shadow stretching, twisting, adapting. It didn't walk. It glided. It bent the world around it, appearing in reflections, puddles, and even faintly in the texture of the asphalt itself. I glanced at the passenger seat. Empty? Maybe. The fog outside made it impossible to tell. But I could feel its presence pressing in from all directions, like the air itself carried awareness, a predatory intelligence. My pulse thundered in my ears. The radio crackled. Not music, not static, voices. Hundreds of them, overlapping, whispering, murmuring. I couldn't understand the words at first, but slowly phrases formed. "You are never alone. You are mine." The steering wheel felt slippery, though my hands were dry. My vision swam. Every reflective surface, the mirrors, the truck windows, the chrome of the dashboard, showed fleeting images of the figure. Sometimes it crouched, sometimes stretched impossibly tall, limbs bending in ways that should have been anatomically impossible. I forced myself to keep moving, but the road itself betrayed me. Curves appeared where none existed on the map. Mile markers counted backward. Trees twisted unnaturally, branches reaching like fingers, pointing toward me, guiding me into some unseen trap. I remembered the stories from other truckers, tales of the highway phantom. None survived long enough to tell them in detail, only fragments. And now I understood why. The entity didn't just haunt places. It hunted perception, manipulated reality, fed on fear, and it could trap you in a nightmare that became the highway itself. My mind screamed for escape. The night pressed closer, fog and shadows merging, wrapping around the cab, the truck, the road. Every heartbeat was a countdown. Every breath was another thread in the trap weaving tighter around me. I slammed on the brakes instinctively, gripping the wheel as the shadow flickered in and out of existence beside me, rocking slightly. It was patient, knowing I would act, knowing my fear would betray me. And I did. I hit the accelerator again, hurtling down the impossible curves, desperate to survive. The hours dragged endlessly. My eyes burned. My mind teetered on the edge of collapse. The fog, the shadows, the whispers, they were inside me now, not just outside. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum in a void. Then I saw it in full, not entirely human, not entirely shadow, but something between. It didn't run. It didn't chase. It floated, gliding just beside the cab, rocking in rhythm with my pulse, in sync with my fear. The whispers became screams in my head, words that tore at the edges of sanity. You cannot leave. You cannot leave. You are mine. I tried speaking aloud, calling its name, pleading, bargaining. Nothing worked. My words dissipated into the fog, unheard. The entity didn't respond. It only watched, feeding, shaping reality around me, warping the world into its own nightmare. I realized the truck itself was part of the illusion. Mirrors reflected shapes that didn't exist. The dashboard glowed with scratches forming words in some language I didn't recognize. Even the road ahead twisted and folded, creating impossible angles, curves, and intersections. It was a labyrinth designed by fear itself, and I was trapped within it. I gritted my teeth and drove faster, weaving through the fog. My headlights cut through the mist, revealing glimpses of shapes moving just beyond visibility. Branches bending, shadows flickering, eyes glinting for a second too long. Every instinct told me to escape. But the highway had become a cage, a living nightmare. The shadow leaned closer, rocking deliberately. I could almost feel its cold presence in my chest, invading every thought. My hands trembled on the wheel, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Not yet. Survival meant moving forward, through fear, through the impossible curves, into the uncertain dawn. Hours blurred into an endless nightmare. My eyelids felt heavy, but the entity would not allow me rest. Every sound in the cab, the hum of the engine, the shifting tires, was distorted, twisted into whispers. Then came the sudden movement. The shadow appeared inside the cab, not beside, not flickering, but clearly present, rocking slightly. Its skeletal form stretched unnaturally, limbs bending beyond human possibility. I recoiled, gripping the wheel until my knuckles ached. The road outside had disappeared entirely. Fog enveloped the cab, a solid wall pressing in. I couldn't see mile markers, signs, nothing familiar. Only the rocking figure, pressing into perception, bending the world, warping reality itself. I screamed aloud, pleading, bargaining. The entity did not respond. It existed to terrify, to trap, to feed on fear and despair. My mind screamed, and every reflection in the mirrors showed its form, sometimes crouched, sometimes impossibly tall, always observing, always patient. I realized the truth. The phantom wasn't bound by time or space. It followed, hunted and manipulated perception, dragging victims into a hallucination so vivid, so real, that escape seemed impossible. Every instinct told me I was doomed. Yet I kept driving. Only by moving forward, into the unknown, could I hope for survival. The rocking shadow followed, persistent, relentless, a predator of the psyche, never leaving, never blinking, a constant presence in the twisted reality of the highway. Finally, pale sunlight began piercing the fog. The world seemed to stabilize slightly. The rocking shadow flickered, hitting the edges of daylight, shrinking, less solid, less oppressive. I forced myself to breathe, to focus on the road, on the approaching signs of civilization. Every mile was a battle between fear and survival. The fog thinned, the road straightened, and my pulse began to normalize. But the shadow lingered at the edge of perception, retreating slowly but purposefully. I glimpsed a familiar sign, a town junction, real, concrete, tangible. Hope surged. The rocking figure faded further as I approached daylight. My heart still raced, every nerve raw from hours of terror, but I felt a tentative sense of relief. Yet I knew the phantom would never truly leave. It existed outside the rules of day and night, feeding on isolation, fear, and the vulnerability of the lonely driver. I finally reached a well-lit highway junction, traffic, trucks, and travelers offering safety in numbers. I parked, hands shaking, staring at the passenger seat. Empty, silent, normal. Yet the memory of the rocking shadow remained, etched into my mind like an unhealable scar. Authorities found nothing, no evidence, only my story, fleeting glimpses of the impossible, whispers, and a road warped by fear. I named it the Highway Phantom. It wasn't malicious in the traditional sense. It didn't attack physically. It didn't kill. But it existed to terrify, to trap, to prey on the mind, following its victims, feeding on fear. Even years later, I avoid isolated highways at night. Every foggy mile, every deserted rest stop, every reflection in a window brings memories of rocking shadows, distorted roads, whispers in the mind, and the inescapable sense of being hunted. The phantom is still out there, patient, watching, waiting for the next driver alone on a highway at midnight. And for those who see it, survival isn't guaranteed. It was late evening when I rolled into a way station in Nevada. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting a sickly glow over cracked asphalt and abandoned trucks. No cars, no staff, just the hollow, echoing silence of a place forgotten by time. I needed a short break. My eyes were heavy from hours of driving, and the desert night pressed down like a physical weight. As I parked, the wind moaned through the empty lot, carrying a faint metallic scent that made my stomach turn. Something about the silence wasn't natural. It was too deep, too deliberate. I stepped out, stretching, listening to the soft echo of my boots on the concrete. That's when I noticed the first sign. Tire tracks that didn't match any vehicle in the lot. Fresh impressions leading from the back of the station into the darkness. I frowned. Must be another trucker, I muttered to myself. But the emptiness contradicted the explanation. No sounds of engines, no lights, nothing. Just my breath, heavy and uneven. I walked toward the main building. The door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. Inside, papers were scattered, chairs overturned. Yet there was no dust, as if someone had left in a hurry, but very recently. Then I heard it, the soft creak of a door behind me. My head snapped around. Empty lot. No one there. My pulse jumped. I laughed nervously. Desert winds, maybe a loose shutter. But then came a whisper. Low, deliberate, almost human. You shouldn't have stopped. I froze. The air grew heavier. Shadows twisted unnaturally across the lot, bending in ways the moonlight shouldn't allow. Every instinct screamed, get back in the truck, drive away now. I rushed back to my cab, sliding inside, locking the doors. As I started the engine, I caught movement in the mirrors. A figure at the edge of the lot, hunched, rocking slightly, watching, waiting. I knew this wasn't going to be a normal break. Whatever haunted this deserted way station had been waiting. Patient, for a driver foolish enough to stop at night. I stayed in the cab for what felt like hours, gripping the wheel, every nerve on edge. The figure hadn't moved. It remained at the edge of the lot, hunched and rocking slightly, as though studying me, testing my fear. The wind whispered through the broken signage and scattered debris, carrying faint echoes of footsteps that weren't mine. My heart pounded in the eerie stillness, every instinct screaming to leave. But something rooted me to the spot. Fear, maybe, Curiosity, certainly. I finally worked up the nerve to glance in the mirrors. The figure's head tilted unnaturally, following me with eyes that didn't exist. Or perhaps I just couldn't see them clearly. It moved in impossible ways, limbs bending at angles that should have been painful, but weren't. I tried to rationalize. A homeless person, a trick of shadows, my imagination. Yet the lot was completely empty. No footprints, no tire marks, except the ones I had seen earlier leading toward the desert. And the figure's rocking motion. Too deliberate, too synchronized, too alive to be coincidence. I revved the engine slowly, testing if it would react. The figure didn't flinch, didn't retreat. But the longer I stared, the more the shadows around it seemed to stretch and curl, forming faint humanoid shapes in the corners of the lot. It wasn't just a person. It was something else entirely. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. Slowly, cautiously, I pulled the truck into the road. My headlights cut through the darkness. The figure remained at the edge of the lot, rocking in place, watching, patient and unblinking. Even as I drove away, I felt its gaze on me, and a whisper seemed to echo in my mind. You belong here. Soon. Back on the highway, the night seemed calm at first, but the unease from the way station clung to me like a second skin. Every mile stretched endlessly, and the desert shadows seemed to shift with the truck's movement. Then I saw it, a flicker in the side mirror, something tall, rocking slightly, following the truck at a distance. My pulse spiked. I swerved slightly, headlights slicing through the darkness, but the figure stayed at the edge of visibility. I tried to rationalize. A mirage? My exhaustion. But the figure's movements were deliberate. Its form distorted unnaturally, stretching and contracting in ways impossible for any human. Every instinct screamed danger, yet it didn't approach, only watched, patient, omnipresent. The road twisted unexpectedly. A familiar landmark should have appeared, a desert gas station, a rest stop. But none did. The desert felt alive, bending the road, shaping the environment to trap me. I realized then that whatever haunted the way station had followed me, extending its reach across miles of empty highway. I could feel it probing my thoughts, manipulating perception. Shadows along the roadside elongated unnaturally, and the whispering wind became audible voices, murmuring indistinct threats. Every reflective surface, the side mirrors, windows, chrome bumpers, showed fleeting glimpses of the figure, its skeletal form impossibly tall and inhuman. I pressed the accelerator. Tires screamed on asphalt, heart hammering. The figure mirrored every movement in subtle ways, dancing with the truck's momentum. For the first time, I understood. This wasn't just a haunted lot. It was a hunter, a predator that existed beyond logic, bending the highway itself into a trap for the lone driver. Hours of night driving had shredded my nerves. The figure remained at the edge of visibility, never fully present, yet always there, rocking in a deliberate rhythm that synced with my racing heartbeat. Then the whispers began. Soft at first, almost drowned by engine noise. But slowly, they grew, carrying words I could understand. You cannot leave. You belong here. Every instinct screamed to ignore it, but the words dug into my mind, planting fear like seeds. The highway seemed to stretch infinitely, road signs bending, mile markers skipping, desert shadows twisting. I saw movement in the cab's mirrors, a fleeting reflection of the figure. Closer now, almost inside the truck, its skeletal form flickering like it could phase in and out of reality. I screamed, slamming the wheel to correct the truck's path. The tires screamed. The engine roared. I realized the desert had become a psychological labyrinth, each mile a test of willpower, each shadow a trap. The figure wasn't bound by distance or time. It manipulated perception, feeding on fear, guiding me toward something. I refused to stop. I refused to look away. Survival meant driving forward, eyes wide, heart racing, through the fog, the desert, and the entity's warped reality. The entity began to appear more clearly in reflections, side mirrors, shiny truck panels, even the chrome dashboard. Each glimpse distorted, unnatural, bending in impossible ways. I could see its head tilt, limbs stretch, movements fluid yet grotesque. The whispers became voices in my mind, chanting, taunting, guiding me deeper into the night. Every attempt to rationalize failed. Exhaustion, fear, and perception blurred into one horrifying reality. The highway itself had become the entity's domain, its hunting ground. I pressed the accelerator. Every mile marker seemed to jump backward, road curves appearing where none existed. Shadows along the roadside elongated, bending unnaturally, following, mimicking, coiling like living tendrils of fear. I gripped the wheel with raw desperation. The entity didn't chase, it anticipated. Every motion, every heartbeat, synchronized with mine. I realized it fed not on blood, but on terror, anticipation, the pure primal panic of a trucker alone on an empty desert highway at midnight. By now, the night had grown oppressive, heavy, almost suffocating. The desert air pressed against the truck as if it had substance, thick with anticipation. The figure from the way station wasn't just at the roadside anymore. It had begun following me more closely, phasing in and out of sight, appearing and disappearing like a predator toying with prey. Every reflective surface, the mirrors, chrome panels, even my phone screen, showed fleeting glimpses of it, sometimes crouched, sometimes impossibly tall, its skeletal limbs bending in ways that defied logic and anatomy. I couldn't tell where it began or ended. My pulse raced, my hands shook violently on the steering wheel. Then came the whispers, sharper, more insistent. "You cannot escape. You belong here." They seemed to echo from the asphalt, the desert rocks, the sky itself. My rational mind screamed hallucination, exhaustion, paranoia, but instinct told me otherwise. This was real. A shadow flickered across the windshield. I slammed my brakes, tires screeching, heart pounding like a war drum. For a second, it appeared inside the cab, rocking slightly, limbs elongated, its face featureless but impossibly menacing. I gasped, slamming the wheel again to correct the truck. The road itself seemed to warp. Curves appeared where none existed. Mile markers blinked in and out of sequence. Signs twisted toward me like fingers. I was driving through a nightmare crafted entirely for me. I floored the accelerator, praying for survival. The entity mirrored my every movement, synchronized with my fear. Every mile became a battle of wills, a race against a shadow that bent reality to trap me in its domain. Even as dawn teased the horizon, the rocking figure lingered at the edge of perception, patient, unblinking, feeding on terror. Waiting for the moment I might falter, the sun began bleeding into the horizon. Yet the desert remained eerily quiet. My nerves were shredded. Every glance in the mirrors revealed fleeting glimpses of the figure, closer now, almost inside the truck, limbs bending unnaturally, swaying in rhythm with my heartbeat. I tried talking aloud, calling its name, bargaining, pleading. But the entity didn't respond. It didn't need to. Its presence was a suffocating pressure on my mind, warping my perception of distance, time, and motion. Every instinct screamed, escape. Every rational thought failed. The desert around me warped in subtle ways. Shadows twisted unnaturally, desert rocks formed shapes, signs seemed to lean toward me. It controlled perception, reality, and fear itself. The whispers escalated to voices, overlapping, indecipherable yet threatening. You cannot leave. You are mine. Always. I pressed the accelerator, tires shrieking against the asphalt. My heart thundered. The entity mirrored every movement, flowing alongside the cab in a twisted dance, anticipating every turn, every swerve, every attempt to flee. In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. This was not a haunting in the traditional sense. The figure didn't kill. It didn't attack physically. It existed to trap, to manipulate, to feed on terror, bending the world itself to its will. The desert highway had become a labyrinth designed for me alone. Escape wasn't guaranteed. Survival meant continuing, driving blindly, praying that the horizon would bring safety, or at least respite from its presence. Hours of relentless driving had shredded my mind. The desert, once familiar, had become alien, bending reality. Mile markers skipped, signs twisted, and shadows swirled unnaturally along the roadside. The figure now loomed closer, almost inside the cab at times, limbs bending grotesquely. Its rocking motion had become a perverse rhythm, synchronized with my heartbeat. My pulse was raw, every nerve screaming. The whispers were constant now, penetrating thoughts, eroding clarity. You belong here. You cannot leave. You are mine. I realized the highway, the desert, the empty way station. It was all connected. The entity didn't just haunt one location. It existed to trap drivers in isolation, bending perception, warping reality, feeding on terror until the mind shattered. I forced myself to keep moving, eyes wide, clutching the wheel, desperate for daylight, for sanity, for escape. Every mile became a test of will, every shadow a potential threat, every whisper a promise of doom. At last, pale light streaked across the horizon. The desert returned some semblance of normality. The skeletal figure began retreating to the edges of perception, rocking slower, less defined. I could finally see mile markers, signs, and a distant town. The whispers faded, replaced by the natural sounds of desert birds and the truck's hum. Yet the figure's presence lingered, an indelible memory etched into the edges of my vision, a reminder that the entity did not fully vanish. It simply waited for the next driver alone on the road. Even with sunlight, I couldn't shake the fear that it was still watching, waiting, patient and unblinking, always ready to trap the next victim. I reached the first town safely, parking among other trucks, shaking. The cab was empty, silent, normal. But the memory of the rocking shadow haunted me. Its impossibly long limbs, the whispers in my mind, the distorted highway. Authorities found nothing. No footprints, no traces of a person or entity, only my story. I named it the deserted way station phantom. It didn't attack, didn't kill. It existed to terrify, manipulate perception, and trap the mind in isolation. Years later, I avoid desert highways at night. Every foggy mile, every abandoned way station, every reflective surface reminds me of the phantom. It's still out there, patient, watching, waiting for the next lone driver at midnight. For truckers alone on desolate highways, the entity remains eternal. A shadow that doesn't sleep, a presence that bends reality, and a haunting that refuses to end. It was a moonless night on I-80, Nebraska, and I was alone, hauling an empty trailer across miles of endless black asphalt. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the occasional road sign, the edges of distant cornfields, and nothing else. Silence wrapped around the cab like a blanket, heavy and suffocating. I caught movement in my side mirror, a flicker, almost imperceptible. I shook my head. Tiredness, I thought. Night driving does strange things to your perception. But then it happened again. A glimmer in the mirror, like someone was sitting in the passenger seat, hunched forward, staring at me. I spun my head. Empty. Just the interior of the cab. I laughed nervously, muttering to myself, "Get a grip, man. You're imagining things." But the flicker returned, sharper this time. In the mirror, a figure sat silently, limbs bent unnaturally, rocking slightly, its face hidden in shadow. I blinked. Gone. My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed that I shouldn't have stopped, that I shouldn't have even looked. I tried to rationalize, reflections from passing signs, my own shadow, fatigue. But the feeling of being watched was undeniable, crawling up my spine, making my skin prickle. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. The figure mirrored my exact movements, perfectly synchronized with my heartbeat. I moved my hand to adjust the radio, so did the figure. I shifted in my seat, again mirrored. Panic clawed at me. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, nothing but black asphalt and the faint glow of distant lights. Every reflective surface in the cab now felt like a window into another reality, another presence. I gripped the wheel tightly, staring ahead, trying to ignore it. But the sense of being observed persisted, gnawing at my mind, waiting, patient, unblinking. I knew instinctively that this was no hallucination. Something unnatural had attached itself to the truck, to me, and it wasn't letting go. The night dragged on, long and oppressive, each mile stretching endlessly. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every glance in the mirrors revealed the same disturbing sight. A shadowy figure sitting in the passenger seat, motionless yet synchronized with every subtle movement I made. I tried talking aloud. "Who's there? What do you want?" My own voice sounded hollow in the cab. No answer. Only the mirror reflected the figure, unmoving yet alive in some inhuman way. I glanced at the dashboard. Nothing abnormal. The gauges flickered normally. The stereo worked fine, yet the presence remained, almost palpable, pressing against my mind like a weight I couldn't shake. I rationalized. Hallucinations from fatigue, staring into the night too long, stress of long-haul driving. But logic couldn't erase the creeping horror, the way the figure seemed to anticipate my every move. Hand on the wheel, foot on the pedal, head tilting. It mirrored me perfectly. Then I noticed something impossible. When I blinked, it didn't. When I looked away and back, it was closer, sitting straighter, watching, patient. Its face remained shrouded in shadow, featureless yet menacing. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road. But soon, the mirrors themselves seemed to warp, reflecting not just the cab interior, but fragments of a distorted world. Roadways bending, shadowy forms flickering behind, shapes that should not exist. The whisper came next, soft and deliberate, like breath against my ear, though no one was there. "You can't leave. You belong with me." My chest tightened. I slammed the accelerator, desperate to reach any town, any light. But the darkness stretched ahead endlessly, swallowing the horizon. The figure did not move forward. It simply waited, mirrored my actions, and the whispers continued, relentless, invasive, impossible to ignore. I realized then that I wasn't just being haunted, I was being studied, trapped in a supernatural reflection, a passenger in a nightmare that had no physical form. The road, the cab, my own reflections. It was all a maze designed to torment, a psychological prison I couldn't escape. Hours passed, yet the darkness seemed endless. Every glance in the side and rear mirrors revealed it. The shadowy passenger, always there, synchronized with my movements, unmoving yet alive. My pulse raced. Every nerve screamed. The highway stretched into infinity. Mile markers skipped, signs appeared and vanished. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly, my knuckles were white. I realized the mirrors weren't just showing reflections. They were windows into another reality. A place where the figure existed fully, and I was trapped in its perception. I tried reasoning, tried ignoring it, even closing my eyes briefly. But when I opened them, the figure had moved closer. Its featureless face aligned perfectly with mine in the mirror. I screamed aloud, slamming both hands on the wheel, heart hammering. The whisper came again, soft but unmistakable. "You're mine. You can't escape, never." I pressed the accelerator, tires screaming against asphalt. The figure mirrored every turn, every swerve, its shadow stretching unnaturally across the cab. The highway itself warped, edges bending, shadows curling, the desert around me twisting. I realized I wasn't driving alone. I was being herded, studied, tormented by a being that existed between reflections, beyond human comprehension. The darkness thickened, oppressive, almost solid. The road ahead twisted unnaturally. Every curve seemed impossible, signs bending like fingers reaching out to grab me. The shadow in the passenger seat didn't move physically. It existed through perception, through mirrors, through reality itself. I tried talking aloud. "What do you want? Who are you?" Only silence, except for the whispers inside my mind. "Your fear is my playground. Your mind is my cage." The interior of the cab warped. Reflections flickered, the figure appearing taller, limbs bending at grotesque angles, rocking slightly in rhythm with my heartbeat. Every turn, every shift in speed was mirrored. It anticipated my actions. I realized that leaving the highway wasn't an option. No exit, no town, no roadside stop. The entity had extended its domain beyond the cab, beyond the mirrors, manipulating the road itself. It fed on isolation and fear, warping my perception, bending reality to trap me in an endless loop. I pressed on, heart hammering, eyes fixed forward, unwilling to glance in the mirrors again. But the memory of the rocking figure haunted every corner of my vision. The whispers intensified, invading my mind. "You can't leave? You're mine. Always." The entity didn't need physical form. Its presence was a weight pressing on my consciousness, an invisible grip on sanity. I tried focusing on the road, but shadows along the roadside moved unnaturally. The cornfields bent slightly, shadows forming humanoid shapes that vanished when I looked directly. Every reflective surface, the side mirrors, dashboard chrome, windows, flickered with its presence. I realized I was no longer in control. The entity controlled perception, feeding on fear, warping reality, bending the highway itself into a trap. Every mile stretched endlessly. Every shadow threatened. The figure mirrored every move I made, rocking in rhythm with my heartbeat, mocking my attempts to escape. Fatigue gnawed at me, yet I dared not sleep. Every glance at the mirrors revealed it closer, more defined. Its featureless face aligned with mine, its presence invasive and suffocating. The whispers became a constant murmur, eroding my thoughts. "You are mine. You cannot leave." I clenched the wheel, trying to resist. Every shadow along the roadside seemed to reach for the truck, curling and stretching like black smoke. Reality itself warped. Mile markers skipped, signs twisted, cornfields bent unnaturally. I understood fully now. Escape required endurance, focus, and hope that dawn would break its hold. The entity wasn't attacking. It existed in a psychic bond, feeding on panic and exhaustion. Every glance, every movement, every thought it anticipated. I realized it was tethered to me personally, tracking my fear and shaping the road to feed it. I pressed the accelerator, refusing to slow. The shadows bent with me. The whispers followed me like wind in the cab, a relentless reminder that it had control over perception itself. Finally, pale light edged the horizon. The shadows of the cornfields retreated. The figure remained, rocking slowly, less defined. Whispers faded. The highway returned to normal, yet the sense of being observed persisted. It lingered in the edges of perception, a permanent mark on my mind, waiting for the next driver. I reached the first rest stop safely. My hands shook. The cab was empty. The passenger seat was vacant. Mirrors reflected only me. Yet the memory of its presence haunted me. A psychic scar burned into perception. I knew authorities would find nothing. This was not a physical threat. It existed between reflections, between perception, feeding on isolation, fear, and imagination. Years later, I still avoid long highway nights. Mirrors, reflective surfaces, isolated roads, all bring back the rocking shadow, the whispers, the highway that warped reality itself. I call it the highway mirror. It doesn't attack physically. It doesn't kill. It exists to torment, to trap, to feed on fear. For truckers alone on endless highways, it waits patiently, rocking, observing, and bending perception to trap the next lone driver at night. The highway is its domain, reflections its doorway, and fear its sustenance. And no matter how far I drive, its presence lingers, eternal, patient, and unblinking.